So you got to understand, it's not about politics. It's not about the ideology. It's about controlling what's happening with this 400-year cycle in our sun and blaming it on anything and everything else than the actual true cause of all the changes for the food price rises, the extreme weather we're seeing.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
And this is the reason that I try to do my channel and bring you this information every single week and put up my posts, because we're all in this together. We truly are. You have to realize it's a global event. It's happened before. We know how it's happened, where it's happened, and there's things we can do to protect ourselves, and get measures in place. We can come up with new solutions. We have better technology, and we really could work through this. We absolutely could, absolutely for sure. But the limiting of the communication between parties across the internet, it's not such a good thing at the moment. We need to even have more open communication to start to talk about solutions worldwide for these things that are happening. I mean, you have to think about, where are they harvesting all of our wheat crop? Corporate media and IPCC would be telling you, oh, it's warmest year ever, it's great, everything's abundant, and the USDA and the European Agriculture Association coming out saying, oh, crops are great, it's awesome, good harvest. The massive drought over in Eastern Europe, that's where the hunger stones were shown in what was considered the Czech lands, Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic now, and Poland, all these countries. So that's a huge ban across the northern part of that area of Europe. And the harvest that they don't know where they're going to go with it. Australia's in a mega drought. They lost almost all production out to the east, and then they got the cold damage out west. So we're seeing it everywhere now. Now, what would you do as a global government? I'm going to ask you the question here. Now, these changes are coming. It'll have massive, massive, massive impacts on our society and our cultures and our civilization. Now, what would you do to try to stop the fear and cut off the lines of communication so people couldn't communicate with themselves? Now, this is what they do generally during a coup in a country. They cut off the lines of communication. They usually shut down the radio, the broadcasting, and the internet in a country so people who were involved in the coup to overthrow a government can't communicate with each other. And they put the radio jammers out there, and even if you have independent equipment, ham radios, etc., shortwave, you still have difficulty communicating with each other. Now we're starting to see this very same thing on a global level, where they're starting to cut the lines of communication, which makes me really wonder what's going on at this point. Because as I've said from the very beginning of my channel they're going to crash the economy on purpose about 1 year before the global food shortages start, to the point that it's going to cause civil unrest. Because they need a divided populace to continue to move forward, A, with a socialist agenda, and B, to try to keep control when all these food shortages happen. They're trying to get it into an us and them type of a thing. Now, if your food prices rise 50%, that is going to stretch to the very limit social programs across the U.S., Canada as well. Australia, you can add any of these nations in. So that leaves at least the bottom 10% that don't have enough food that are going to ask for change. You double the food price, and that rises to 25%. It's not a linear, so you double the food price, not 20. It actually goes over 20, 25 to be conservative. So the bottom quarter of a nation is going to be so totally affected that they're going to ask for political change. And they're not going to ask nicely. They're going to be, shall we say, very forceful about it. This is going to need to be controlled. Imagine if a nation flares off. Do you think they're going to want people communicating with each other, telling you that there's also, food riots in this town and that city, and it's going on here and that, and then there's trucks over here, and people are stopping things on the road, and just like we saw in Venezuela? Do you think they're going to want to let you purvey that information and spread that info to others around? I'm going to say no. So you start to see how all these different, variables are starting to intertwine into one whole grand solar minimum showcase, showdown, if you will. You just have to ask yourself, what's next? So if you're going to go down the line, will it be the economists next, like the people who are, like SGT Report and V, the Guerrilla Economist, and Dollar Vigilante? Are these going to be people, the next voices that are going to be taken down because they're really telling you what's happening with the economy? When is this whole crowd going to be silenced out? Social media thinks they can be the gatekeepers. They're acting as it now, and there's no repercussions for them at all. And you know how power is. And I'll tell you what, if it was McCarthyism, it was McCarthyism. And they went all the way up into, coming into the Congress looking for communists. And at that point, people said enough is enough. But in the beginning of those years, they generated the fear. They took people's careers. They took their lives. They stomped on people. They divided the nation, and they went forward because nobody pushed back in the beginning. And it was 2 years of fear. And once they got that foot in the door of all these McCarthyist trials and congressional hearings, man, did it just ignite like a dry bamboo patch. And we are seeing the exact same thing here again. We've seen it in communist China. We saw it with McCarthyism in the United States. And everywhere you look across the planet, you can see it again and again and again. When these radical voices get the first steps in and nobody contradicts them or pushes back, they take the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step. And they do not stop because they're corrupted by the power. And once they feel that, oh, we can moderate whatever's talked about, they're never going to stop, period. Unless we stand up and make them stop. This is the only time they'll stop. And what you're seeing is the extreme radical communist left at the moment taking the power. Nobody's stopping them. Ideological minds are in the top levels of these social media corporations. So you got to understand, it's not about politics. It's not about the ideology. It's about controlling what's happening with this 400-year cycle in our sun and blaming it on anything and everything else than the actual true cause of all the changes for the food price rises, the extreme weather we're seeing, because they've laid down a gauntlet of IPCC, global warming, global tax for so long that if you really knew what was happening, truly what the cause was, you would want everybody fired at these agencies. You would want them brought for trial for fraud, and you would ask governments across the world to open inquiries in congressional hearings or parliamentary hearings, depending on where you are, into these very fraud allegations of what's happening inside these agencies and how we were lied to for decades and why you didn't give a chance to warn us what's happening. We're heading into a 400-year cooling event, looking at a 25% loss of global population at the minimum, and you left us out here on our own, and you didn't warn us for 30 or 40 years, and you guys had that information in these academic circles. Yeah, there would be a revolt from the people taking back the government power. This is why there is such a push right now to just remove any voices that are in the way of consolidating this last-ditch effort. This is it. You saw the purge going out with trying to remove the history of the United States with the Civil War. Then they came to the point where they wanted to remove Lincoln and Washington and Jefferson from memorials, and people said, that is enough. You have overstepped your bounds, and they backed off for now. But you see how far they wanted to take it. They got their foot in the door with that first statue somewhere down in Mississippi. And then they took it to the one in South Carolina. And the students, did you notice it was no adults there? And when I say adults, I mean anybody over 30 years old that has a career and a job moving forward. The professors were in on it. Shame on them. But predominantly, everywhere you looked, it was people that were 30 years and younger that were being used by the politics to push the agenda, and they are just patsies, and they have no idea how used they're being. They think they're all cool trying to change the society, yeah, get these bourgeois punk, whatever it is, out of there. But they, in the end, are going to be rounded up with the rest of them. You know what? Because that's what they did in China. The leaders of the movement became a threat themselves because they had so many followers. So what they did is the middle of the pack, as well as the very top with Mao's wife and the Gang of Four, took everybody out at the top that was, in the beginning, the first organizers, the ones that were at every rally, the ones that were, bombarding and barging into buildings. If you're listening and you're one of those people that are pushing the movement, you're not safe either. You're not. You're being used as a puppet for the time that is right now. And when they no longer need you, you will be against a wall and your friend of squad will be behind you. They will no longer need you. When the purge is done, you're no longer needed. And you will understand, you'll wake up thinking you're some big hot shot in the movement, and you'll be rounded up. Look at a history book. Look what they did with the, 100 Flowers Revolution in China. So after the top leaders were executed and put into labor camps themselves because they became too powerful in the communist movement because they had too many followers. Okay, things had settled down enough at that time that they're like, all right, we've had enough. Everybody come out. Air your grievances, really tell us how you feel. We'll document it. We'll go ahead and we'll talk back to the authorities because we've had so much loss and, anger and family fighting with family. And, it's enough for now. Let's work it out. See what's happening. Please air all of your grievances to us. And they took down notes for about a year. And then they rounded everybody else up who spoke out. That was the ultimate purge. Anybody who had survived the brainwashing and the labor camps and the reinternment camps and the re-education camps and anybody who was in the movement that disagreed with the new movement, they just took notes because everybody volunteered the information. And what they did was they rounded everybody up that did not kowtow 100%. If you were just 1% off of what they wanted with the ultimate goal and destination, hey, welcome to the labor camp. I'll tell you a story. I was up in Chengdu, knew a girl up there, and both of her families went to labor camps. They were both teachers. And then her father was a doctor, and he was teaching medicine at a university. So he was considered a teacher, even though he was an MD. They put them out in fields every day with spoons to dig a water reservoir for a dam. And not only did they have them dig it with spoons, every time they took a spoon load of something, they had to chastise themselves. Like, oh, I'm such a bad person for believing that capitalism when we can all have our own way. Spoon in the cup. And they were only out in groups of 5, and there was one leader over them that had to listen to each person, denigrate themselves every spoonful they took. That's what it came to, and this is where we're going back in the United States right now. And ultimately, when you think about this grand solar minimum, you got to realize there's going to be a 25% loss of population across the planet anyway. Or they're already planning on that. What do you think all those extra coffins for, those giant coffins where they're putting all those, you've seen those documentaries where they have coffins that can lay 8 people at a time, but they got 1 million of those things. There's going to be a lot of just chaos going on, and they're going to need to control it the best they can. Now, they don't want it to unwind at the same time here, just frivolously unwind without an agenda so they can, get the best control in the decline that's possible. Now, the decline in the economy goes right along with this. See, these are the fingerprints of the grand solar minimum anyway. You got to understand, these 3 things happen every single time there's a grand solar minimum. And you could trace them every 400 years back in history. There's a significant decline in the economy. People are moving so much money into food that everything else out around it collapses because in the height of it, there were 5 food spikes from, let's say, 1640 to 1680 or so, where they would have 3 or 4 years of bad harvest and the food prices would quadruple, 4x. So think about that. I'm talking about just a mere 50% rise in food prices would unleash social chaos across our planet with the bottom 10% of earners on the planet in any country. Doubling food prices would bring in 25% of a nation would not be able to survive. Now put in 4 times food price rises. What'll that do? 4x, that would upset everything. There'd really be nothing left. So I'm just trying to paint the blueprint and the picture for you here because I wanted to bring up some of the events that are happening globally in terms of these weather changes that we're seeing, the crop losses we're seeing, the extreme conditions we're seeing, all on multi-century levels, and it's intensifying. We're really not into anything yet. It's going to get incredibly off the hook here in a very short time. Well, the bottom's going to drop out, and you're going to see a lot of things that you didn't think were possible.
And since I have been talking about our need moving forward in this new society that we're entering as our global grain production starts to be reduced in yield, your food prices are going to skyrocket. And I mean skyrocket, not just doubling or tripling, something like 5 or 10 times higher by 2020 at the very least. TrueLeafMarket.com. I really want to talk about growing your own food, which will be a necessity moving forward. They've been around since 1974, heirloom and organic seeds. You know, since I've started talking about them in my videos, I have a lot of people write and say that they've previously ordered, that they know the owner, having great results, good customer service. They quite enjoyed the seed quality as well. And there's so many ways that we can go about growing different types of vegetables that we're going to need. You know, microgreens are incredibly nutritious. They're super fast to grow. In less than a week, you can have something that you can eat. And we know the benefits of microgreens. All you have to do is use a search engine and look up vitamin, mineral, nutrient content of microgreens. You'll be shocked. Also, sprouts. We can get those a little bit taller, a little more dense, a little bit larger volume on the vegetation mass coming off of there. So how do you know what kind of sprouts to grow? How about wheatgrass or herbs? What about different types of herbs that we can add to our foods? Now, what I just described to you, there's a full range of starter guides there at TrueLeafMarket.com for you to take a look at. Even if it's just for your own knowledge and you don't purchase something from them, at least get the information so you know how to grow microgreens, you know how to grow sprouts, you understand what some of the herbs are for. And not only that, they have wheatgrass and grain seeds. So I'm talking about grain growing regions going offline. We just need to look back in history and see where across the planet there was difficulty growing grains when this grand solar minimum intensified and the jet stream started wandering just like they're doing today due to a decreased magnetosphere that does not hold our jet streams locked in their traditional flows. Grains are one thing, herb seeds are another, cover crops, something different, but whatever you do, organic seeds are going to be a necessity because you can save those seeds and then grow them the next season, which you unequivocally cannot do with GMO. TrueLeafMarket.com. Use the link below and give yourself the gift of organic and heirloom seeds.
Before the break, I was talking about how the unwind of politics and economy and control of the internet and the censorship is all leading to the very large fingerprint that this grand solar minimum has intensified. Things are beginning to unwind weather-wise far beyond what was predicted with CO2. The temperatures are not up there. The ice is increasing up in the Arctic as well as Greenland. They told us snow would be a thing of the past, and then we are here again seeing multi-century storms. And so I wanted to go through this explaining a little bit about, where we're going to go with the intensification and kind of a timeline, and also some of the changes we're seeing, which you would never expect to see. I mean, this is ridiculous, these temperatures and snowfalls in extremes. So this was to be expected that the growing seasons would be shortened. So this is the main point, the reason that I do my channel. It's all about the food production. You could talk about weather, and that's great. And I really, nature's so beautiful. And the indicator is nature verifying that this cycle is here again. So that's why I talk a little bit. I talk about 80%, 70% about the weather, and then the other 30% is the food losses that are occurring. And in that, then I try to interweave past cycles, how this affected society, and how I believe it will also affect our current society, and how they're going to try to control the slow train wreck as we move through these next 3 years. And you can start to see why we're really mimicking something in 2008 and 2009 with the economy. Fuel prices are going up, food prices are going up. We see the greening of Africa as well. Chinese are very smart to start investing in the Sahel because it is just rainstorm after rainstorm, and parts of that area are greening again. Grasslands have returned to what was once desert area in North Africa. And the Chinese had already pounced on it, taking millions of acres. How did they know that? They must have followed the cycles from all their traders with the Phoenicians going back 3,000 years. Yeah, that's why they knew it was going to green and start raining again in the desert. So I am just curious which cycle they know that we're repeating. Are we really back into a 400-year repeat cycle, such as a Maunder minimum cooling cycle that the media is feeding us a lot of? Or is it something much more powerful on the cycle that the Chinese are aware of? Because deserts don't normally just green and then go back again in a 400-year cycle. My personal opinion, like I've said many times before, I think we're repeating something in the 2000 year or the 3,600-year cooling cycle that is rocking the intertropical convergence zone and shifting moisture patterns to the point where new climates are emerging across the planet that will be here for decades to come. My call is 3,600 years after more research. In the beginning of doing the channel, I really believed it was a 400-year cooling. But after doing more and more research, talking to more people, looking at longer duration time cycles, I believe we're something minimum 2,000-year cycle, possibly 3,600 years. I believe that 36 is so important in the religious texts and numerology across the planet, and ancient cultures are always pushing to 36, 9s, etc. I believe it has something to do with this. Orange juice consumption is down. I'm up here on Fresh Plaza. We're talking about orange juice consumption is reduced again across the planet. Well, prices are so high that people are abandoning orange juice and moving their consumer spending habits. And we're going to start to see this again and again in many different ways playing out in the future. If something becomes too expensive, people just abandon it to a point. Now, you can abandon orange juice because it's too expensive. Overall, that takes out a big chunk of the consumer buyer, and then the price is reduced. There's a natural ebb and flow in demand and consumption and price movements on that. Orange juice is not a necessity. We can let that one go. But when does it come down to beef becomes too expensive? Will you abandon that? Yeah, some people will. They'll move to others. What would you move in if you do eat meat? I know there's a lot of vegetarians. Not insulting you, by the way. I'm just asking you about possible shifts and movements in consumption. So if you're not going to eat beef because it's too expensive, which will happen next year. See, they sold off an enormous amount of the steer and cattle this year because they couldn't feed them. There was no hay. The droughts created incredibly expensive prices for hay and feed for cattle this year. So instead of keeping the herds, there was a glut of sale of steer, cattle, etc. out into the market. There was a tidal wave of beef coming across the market because the farmers couldn't afford to keep them. It was too expensive. Everybody knocked down their herds all the way from anywhere. Everybody was talking, knocked herds from western coast all the way to Tennessee and everywhere else in between Texas and down. Everybody knocked herds down. With that being said, it takes 3 years to get a heifer, give birth, bring up the calf, and then bring it to something that could be sold into market. It takes about 3 years to do that in good conditions. So now all these tidal wave of beef is across the market at the moment. Beef is it's gonna be like oranges. They're just gonna get too expensive. So what would you eat in lieu of or as a substitute for beef? I don't know. Maybe some people will move to goat. Maybe you'll start raising your own rabbits or something. Who knows? But there'll be shifts for sure, especially as things become more expensive. And we're in that point right now. The wheat is going to come in so high at the end of the year. It's going to shock the futures market. And all those things you buy in the store that are made in factories, those are going to get more expensive too. Since I just brought up supermarket, I had a note here. I was at home talking to somebody, and they told me that there was a power outage due to large-scale thunderstorms that had rolled through down in Georgia. And this person's brother went into a supermarket. Lights were all out. Emergency lights were on. And he's like, yeah, I just need to get some milk and a few other things. I have cash. You can just ring it up. Just write it down on a piece of paper, and you can keep the overage. I don't even need change back. It's cool. I understand. Just ring it up to the nearest dollar, and you keep the extra change, and I'll be on my way. And the manager was like, I'm sorry, we can't do that. We can't ring you through. And he's like, I understand. I have cash. I don't need to be rung through. And they're like, no, we can't sell you anything. Computers aren't ordering. And we won't know what the label was, the QR code on the back, so we can't scan it through to reorder. And it'll mess up our whole system. So we're not going to sell it to you, even if you have cash. First-hand account from this person's brother telling me what went on. Even though you think you're safe with cash, in an emergency situation, you're still not going to be able to buy food in our modern supermarkets because they won't sell it to you. So then this spurred me. So I went down to Trader Joe's. It's kind of a cool little supermarket in town. And we went down to the Kroger, a little more expensive shopping there. Prices are higher. I went out of my way to find the managers, and I asked them the very same question. I said, just in the event of a power outage, if I bring you cash, what can I still buy in your store if the power goes out? And you know what? They both told me we'd close the store because we can't sell you that. We would lock people out of the store. Just close it up. And I said, all right, well, in a really emergency situation, those little glass doors aren't going to stop hungry people. You're going to bring troops in to try to control the supermarkets when people are hungry and they go, hey, I got cash. A lot of people are under the impression just because they got green paper bills, they can walk in and get something. That is not true. And I encourage every single one of you listening to go out to a local supermarket where you buy and ask the managers what will happen when the electricity goes out and they can't use their swipe through laser QR code to reorder. Will they still sell you product out of that supermarket, or will they close the doors on a power outage?
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.